when we're talking, especially when we're talking about people. And I have found that in today's age we have a lot of different terms currently being used, and many times a person who is not a native person, not an indigenous person, does not know how to refer to indigenous people, right? So in any case, I found that many native people don't know how to refer to indigenous people. So my terms are quite simple. Indigenous means any person from any culture on any continent that lives close to the earth. We are usually animistic people, meaning that we find a spirit in everything, and that we have a relationship with the earth. And so that's how we determine really the level of indigenism that you have, whether or not you have a relationship with the earth. So when I speak of indigenous people, I'm talking about any indigenous person, any location in the world. Right? We are the most oppressed peoples on earth. When I am specifically talking about indigenous people here, the term that I typically use is native. And that term is a non-offensive term, that is a factual term that all native people here recognize as valid. Now, when you talk to people in Canada, they prefer to use the term First People, First Nation, to talk about their indigenous people, as opposed to, say, American Indian, which we use here, or Native American, which we use here. Now, obviously, as Cleveland American Indian movement, we have chosen to use a certain term, American Indian. That is in recognition of basically three different factors. The first is that that is a political term that is recognized by the United States government. People who are American Indians are wards, typically, of the United States federal government, and therefore the federal government has treaty obligations, and which basically means fiduciary obligations towards those people. The second reason that we use the term American Indian is because, well, back in the 50s, the National Congress of the American Indian, which is the largest body of leaders who come together to represent the nations here, they chose to continue to use the term American Indian, which ties into the third reason, is its historical use. And historically, it has been used to oppress the indigenous people of this continent. And we recognize the historical tradition of that word, and also recognize that if we were to change that word, many people would then not continue to make the leap from history to contemporary times. At some point, the American Indian has died out, and as we know, that has been the object of the systematic oppression of this society since 1492, right? well, I won't say the object, that has been a byproduct. The object since 1492 was to enslave us and to make their European societies wealthy from our labor. When they could not do that, then, well, let's take their land and make them gone. But in any case, at some point in the languaging, the American Indian dies out and the Native American then becomes. And the Native American does not have that history. In fact, so, you know, my child here is, I'm sorry, he is no longer a child, right? He is becoming a young man or a very, very old boy. I'm not quite sure yet. In any case, I have homeschooled him, right? And one of the things that we studied, one of the areas, was Ohio history. And when you look at the modern day books, you see that many of them have adopted the language of the Native American. I guess that is fine, but it is not historically accurate because for two distinct reasons. First of all, those people did not call themselves Native Americans, so it is no more historically accurate to call them Native Americans than to call them American Indians. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that term, Native Americans. That really, if you look at it in the context of, let's say, 1763, right? When the proclamation was passed to prevent the Western Reserve here from going to the colonies. It was forever set aside for Indians. And many of the treaties, you know, say that, right? If we remove the American Indian, then from the languaging, those treaties are no longer valid. It's not like they're being honored, but they're still valid. And historically accurate, you know, the colonialists were not fighting Native Americans. Historically, they were fighting anti-Americans. And to call those people Native Americans really turns history upon its head. We were fighting American aggression. The same aggression, you know, that started at Fort Plymouth and continues around the world to this day. So, we choose to continue to call ourselves American Indians. Now, when we talk amongst ourselves, you know, my son and I, we are Muskogee. Bob is Chiricahua Apache. And when we talk amongst ourselves, we recognize the peoples that we are. Right? When we use the term American Indians, that's for the benefit of people who are not us, right? We use the term indigenous people. We use the term native people when we talk amongst ourselves, right? And when we want to recognize that we are not all the same people, Muskogee people are not Apache people. Our ancestors are from different places. Our cultures, our languages are different. The songs that we sang when we picked our medicinal herbs, different, right? So when we want to recognize those differences, we talk about native peoples, right? And indigenous peoples. Just like in Canada they talk about native nations, right? And here we talk about the traditional nations or the Indian nations or just the nations as a shorthand. So I hope that puts everything in a little bit more of a perspective. Now, when you meet an indigenous person, it is always appropriate to ask them who their people are, or who, and perhaps, what their nation is. It is always appropriate to ask them how they would like to be referred. Would you like to be referred to as American Indian, or, first person? However, that's appropriate, considering this is the land that we all live on. And I find that when you engage with people in this fashion, indigenous people are much more than apt to open up to you, because typically what we get is, oh, you're Indian. I met a Navajo person. I met a Navajo.
Okay. We're supposed to meet at 3:30 today, right? No? 3. I apologize. I'm sorry. He's a Navajo and I'm Apache. So we just refer to ourselves by our tribe mostly, for the most part. Unless I don't know somebody, I might ask, what nation are you? Okay, and sometimes it's a little trick for us to use. When we run into people that might be voicing the opposite of their concerns, the opposite of what we are, for example, Chippewa, the first thing they may do is come up to us and say, I'm Indian. And I go, okay, well, what nation are you? So it doesn't mean that they're not Indian, but it means that they don't understand, the traditional way. They don't understand who Indians really are. We're indigenous, we're native of this. We're native of Arizona, New Mexico. Depending on yours is where?
The South.
The South. So, it kind of geographically defines us. Tribe, Russell Means used to say tribe refers to mammals, apes. We're not tribes, we're people, we're human beings. So Russ had his own version, his own way of addressing it, but for the most part I use that. What do you do?
For me, to answer that, I definitely consider myself as a nation. Being Dene, that's my first clan is Dene. My mother, she's Navajo. And when we talk about clans, we go by your mother. Out here, out west, it's normally your father to check his lineage, but we go by your mother. And for me to say that I'm Dene, I am Dene, and which is my nation. That's a good point what you just said. I definitely I don't consider myself no tribe, nothing like that. That's apes,
Right. You have an individual from both worlds, traditionally living in a Hogan, traditionally living on his land and owning property there, and absolutely a direct result of relocation. His parents were enticed.
My mother, she was reloaded to Cleveland back in the 60s.
Mm-hmm. And if you read the needs assessment, there was a gate in that spoke of relocation. So hopefully, if you didn't, you'll see it there. And the games that the Bureau of Indian Affairs played with the relocation on telling them that you're going there, and not telling them it's a one-way ticket. So literally a one-way ticket. So telling them that you can't take your car, because that's a way out. Which what's Gayton's first name?
Sally.
Sally Gayton. Sally's an old matriarch. She's like 80 years old, tough as nails. And they told her she can't take her car. And you could see her say, "Oh no, I'm taking my car." You're not telling me I'm leaving my car here. And I think she was in Oklahoma at the time. But there were 7 target cities, and then later on to be 11 target cities for relocation. So because we always seem to go back to relocation. I'm going to let Willie talk a little bit longer, but I'm going to bring Bill Loretto here. And Bill Loretto came here one year. He's a direct result of relocation. His family came in. They beat the crap out of him. He's got one side of his face is literally stainless steel, because these white guys beat him up, 4 or 6 of them with baseball bats. And the reason they beat him up is because on that particular area, I think he's from Chinle, on that particular area, the college that's there in that city is there only because that particular Navajo group allowed them to build the college with the understanding that Navajo
Going with Dene College?
could go there free. Yeah.
Dene College up in State
Yes.
Lane?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, where's that?
So he was walking past the bar and they beat him up because he didn't have to pay to go to college. But they don't get it. It's like people don't
Yeah.
get you give something to get something. It's like in Michigan too. If you live in Michigan and you're Native American, you can go to college free.
Mhm.
And if you don't, you can take up residency for I think in Michigan it's 30 days, and you can get free college.
I know for me to go to college out in on Dene land, I had to live out there, but there was nothing, no heating ventilation like that where I have certificates in it, you know, for what I learned. And it's kind of funny that you say that, because first time I went out there, I put a little application in one little corner store thinking, you know, I worked through a system out here in Cleveland, go out there, and they're like, no, you need a diploma. Like, wait, hold on, what? So I got my diploma while I was out there, but it's kind of tricky how you say that, you know. It's so interesting to believe that we as people, we learn, we trust, we have done things that we were ashamed of, and we've done things that we're glad of, you know. And when he was talking about, I have a hard time talking. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Willie.
You were talking about religion or what?
Well, we're gonna talk about health issues, but the one thing that he did say is we the people. Most nations, most tribal names mean first people, the people. You know, most of them. I mean, that's not one or two, but and it's amazing how that happened. I don't know how that happened. I really do. You have any idea how that happened? It just amazes me.
I mean, because
Original people.
because that's who we are.
Yeah, well, we are absolutely.
First Nation.
Yeah, we're
That
First
is-
Nations.
that
We're the
is-
first people here.
That's the type of
Yeah.
animal that we are.
Yeah.
We all have around the world our historical name for what we are. It's not Homo sapien. I mean, that's scientific.
Yeah.
Our name for ourselves, people, human, the great feminist joke, right? Since the 70s, we've moved away from man. We don't say man. You know, Neil Armstrong took that great leap for man, and then mankind. We say human, the Latin word for man. And we think we're also scientific, and we made that leap forward.
You know, it's like my mother told me a long time ago. We as the Native people, we don't own land.
Right.
We don't own water. We're keepers. We watch over it.
We're the landlords.
We're landlords.
That's it.
And I didn't understand that for a minute, but as I grow older, I definitely understand it. But out here in Cleveland, you can buy your land and buy 100,000 gallons of water. But is that only the way that determines our wealth is by our livestock? How many lambs, how many sheep you got? That's when I went to Arizona. You know, you have to chop wood in the morning to keep your family warm. You have to haul water. I remember when I was younger, we used to load up a truck. We drive up in the mountains, you know, and fill up big barrels of water because it came out the ground. When I went back there in 2002, there was nothing like that. They closed up all that old stuff, so you cannot get fresh water.
Well, a lot of the water is
yeah,
contaminated with radioactivity. A lot of the water there is now. It's a crisis there, and it's far worse than Flint or any other area, including Canada. Canada
this been
has
going on
some
for
serious
years.
problems. Pardon me?
And this been going on for
Oh
years.
yeah. Nobody talks about it. Nobody talks. Water is the essence of life. Without water, we die. Simple as that. So when we went to Standing Rock, and you had 350 tribes there that were on behalf of everybody, not just Indians. It wasn't just Indians, it's everybody. The Takiasi, we're all related. And you're going to hear that. Either people are going to say it. How do you say it in Dene? We are all related.
I lost my Navajos.
Okay.
Garbage.
But Takiasi is Lakota, and it means we are all related. So it doesn't matter who we are. We've shared our religion except for the Pueblos, the Kivas. They won't share it with other nations. They won't.
It's like Hopis. I've been to Hopi ceremonies, which is over the mountain where I stay at. You know, I'm right there with Pinon. You go over the mountain, you're in Hopi land. I've seen some of their Kiva, you know.
It's underground, and they went underground originally because of the Spaniards, so they had to hide. So that they continue with their ceremonies underground, and it's really neat. And I've always wanted to be a part of it, but
beautiful.
They don't let you in if you're not Pueblo. It's just the bottom line. But anyway, this was a needs assessment. It was focused on or geared towards mental health issues that we had. And if you read the first the opening narrative about Cleveland Indians and in generalizing for nationwide, we have the highest rate of suicides in our community per capita. But it also we addressed it in a different manner. We have something called a talking circle. And the talking circle is where we get together and we have a feather, an eagle feather. And the eagle feather is used, it's passed around, and each person speaks. And when they speak, whatever they say stays in that room. Whatever they share with you stays in that room. And it's a very open and it's a very spiritual way of working out issues in the community, working out politics, if you want to call it, in the community. So we used talking circles. We had a camp called the Red Spirit Circle camp. And what we did is we took the adults and their children, and during the course of these events that we had, we also had surveys, and we'd do the evaluation. So I had Diane Gurley, who was a PhD, and she did most of the data collection. And then I had a young man by the name of Chris Storman that we hired. These are all contracted people. Neither one of them were a native, but that we hired, and he was from Case Western Reserve. So the end result is that, and there's a few things that haven't been put in. The population wasn't correct, but our population varies so much, and it's not because we don't know what our population is. It's because traditionally, nationwide, natives do not self-identify as natives. Does anybody know why? Why we don't do that, for the most part?
It was illegal at one point to call yourself Muskogee.
And what else?
Upon penalty of death. Okay. So, many of us have been told, call yourself Mexican, call yourself black, whatever it takes to survive. Right. And, many of us still do that because that has been the coping mechanism to deal with colonization that we have found works. Right.
And the other thing is that, and that's correct, bounties were placed on us for our skin, for the term red skin. They killed us and gutted us, and for our scalps. But that's just been passed on from family to family, and a lot of the older people, especially when I say older, people my age, that came in from relocation or that are my age now, that came in for relocation, like your mom is my age, they always hid because people, two things, nonprofit organizations exploit Native Americans, and they exploit the statistics, they exploit the number, and they get funding, and they don't do anything. And it's really sad. I know I keep looking at you, but I'm not picking you out. I don't know why. I think you're so intent when you look at me. I just kind of, nonprofit organizations can be a very big business. And a good example is Goodwill. Does anybody know anything about Goodwill? It's not a nonprofit corporation. The guy makes $230,000 a year. And the stuff that you give to Goodwill is that you donate from your heart instead of giving it to somebody else. They resell. They sell. They clean it up and they sell it. And he gives some money to charity. He's not obligated. Any nonprofit that gets money, not money, but gets clothes or items that they resell, are not obligated to. They can sell it. They're not obligated to give it out. And the people that donate it get tax deductions from it. So it works both ways. There's other organizations. I had a list that I put on my Facebook of a lot of these organizations that generally the executive directors make hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, my average pay was $40,000 a year. Yeah, you can't live with you can't support a family with that. You know, I think one year that I had 4 grants, and these 4 grants were paying me, is the only time that I ever actually made money as a nonprofit. You just don't make money. If you're going into social service, you can guarantee you're going to be poor the rest of your life unless you married some rich guy or unless he's out there really hustling, because that's the way it is. Or, I don't mean to focus just on women, but so it's always, nonprofits are, to me, are always from the heart. But the natives traditionally don't do that because they are exploited or because they were hunted. I met a woman probably about 20 years ago where I live, 100% Indian. She was a Lakota. Mm-hmm. Looked like she walked out of National Geographic. You know, I said, "Who are you?" You know, I said, "How long have you been here?" She never heard of the center, and she had lived there for 20, 30 years, and she was told by her mother from the time she was a little kid, never, ever to tell anybody you're an Indian. Well, if you looked at her, she just kind of gave it away, you know, like completely. And she because we were hunted, because there were bounties, because people made money off of us. So I was kind of shocked to find that at this late in time, mm-hmm. you know, and that people still thought of that. But most of the people that I've known when I met as a younger person are dead because our age, our life expectancy is not very high. Mm-hmm. But we did. So, any questions so far? Did anybody get a chance to read the thing, or just glance over it? So you saw the formulas that we used. You saw how we approached the youth. Okay, and the youth are different because a lot of the youth are actually don't want to be Indians or have, because of where they're living, because they want to be like everybody else, really had much of an interest in learning their own language. That's why we're losing our languages. I mean, we're losing a lot of them. We used to have ceremonies in the earlier days. We had traditional potlucks, a way of getting together. We didn't have powwows. I started putting the powwows on at the Indian Center. I did it for 16 years. Boy, was that a lot of work. But powwows were originally started in Denver, and that was by Bureau of Indian Affairs to sell their product. They were trying to assimilate us into farming and into raising cattle, and the vehicle to use was the vehicle that they chose to use was powwows, and powwows is a great way of getting together for the various tribes. And one interesting part of powwows is you have music or songs that are sung in Indian language, but you also have vocables, so that people from other tribes that come together and sing don't have to learn the words; they know the vocals. It's really neat.
Yeah, for one thing, me know about powwows. You have powwows and you have peyote songs, which are spiritual songs, you know, and powwows are good for when you're socializing. But as far as me being at Dene, we have squaw dances, which are very similar to powwows, but they take place at night, and everybody dances ceremony. But me, as far as coming out here out east, you know, I was born out here in Cleveland. You know, the powwows I know are everybody joining around. But when I traveled, I've seen how southern powwows are. They're different.
Oh yeah.
'Cause you got gore dancers, which, you know, which are a sacred dance before the powwow happens. You know, you got sun dances, which are very ceremonial too. You know, between Lakota, you know, and I see that the sun dances are not, they all over. All indigenous tribe practice it.
Right.
You know.
But anyway, powwows were started by the BA to start selling their products, and eventually became a social event. But for the most part, most people don't understand that when you go to a powwow, it's actually a religious, a spiritual event for us. When the drum stick touches the drum, that's when the dancer's toes, one of them, hits the ground. So if they're going fast or slow, you're going to see the difference. The smoke, the songs, the music that rises from the drum is our prayers to the Creator. The sacred pipe, when you smoke the sacred pipe, that whether it's bark or whatever we put in it, it's not the wacky tobacco that we put in it. When we put something
Mountain
in that,
tobacco.
yeah, pardon me?
It's mountain tobacco.
Okay, those are our prayers to the Creator. That's how we pray. So when we signed treaties and we smoked the sacred pipe, that was the sealing of it. That was our signature, and that's how we did it. And you know, you see on cartoons and you see people talking about the peace pipe or whatever else. They don't understand how sacred and important it is to us. People become pipe carriers through the Sundance, so they become pipe carriers by the community. An elder in the community may allow them, and it's something that you just don't pick up a pipe and become a pipe carrier. You don't do that. I was given a pipe 2 years ago. It took me 70 years. You know, that's like, wow, that's a long time. You know, and I was honored by it. But anyway, so the approaches that we had were more geared towards urban settings than the approaches that you might find on a reservation. Because on a reservation, you have mostly all Native Americans. You know, you have the staff there are probably for the most part Native. My staff wasn't. I only had one PhD. That was Tony, whatever his name was. I can't remember his last name. Was a PhD. But for the most part, we don't have the professionals that we needed, and so we had to contract people out. So when you look at the assessment, it covers a lot of areas. It covers alcohol, which we have a problem, and I spoke of that last time. It covers diabetes, which is epidemic.
Yeah, I'm diabetic. I know.
Most Indians are. I don't have it yet. I'm lucky, but I have hypoglycemia, so I'm just like right on the border. I have to be careful. Luckily, my lifestyle has kept me that way, I guess. But we have, you look at the assessment, probably 80% of our families are single parents. The diversity in our community, for two reasons, is very, very, we're very diverse because ideally in the 60s and 70s when people came up, they wouldn't go out with anybody that wasn't Native American. And in particular, they had to be from their nation. Okay. Later on, it became other nations. Later on, it became people of color. So you don't have the when I talk to young ladies that say, well, I ask them, are you going to have, are you going to marry an Indian? Well, there's not much of a selection, and the selection that they have here, when women get married and they're going to have a family, the first thing they think about is, well, is he going to take care of me? Is he going to take care of our children? Or is he going to be a drunk? And if he's going to be a drunk, that's not the kind of life they want. They don't want that for their children, and they certainly don't want that for them. So there's not much of a selection here. And even on summer reservations, there's not much of a selection. And that impacts our community as well. Now we have such a diverse community, except for us older people. You're going to see a big difference. Any questions so far with what I'm covering? Some footnotes here. For the, our community, our social and our traditional community generally is, I don't want to say governed by the elders, but the elders have a lot of input into the community. So when people first came to Cleveland, you saw a lot of that. You saw that, you had elders. And what is an elder? Does anybody know what an elder is for our community? Tell me.
An elder is your grandmother, your mother, anybody who's older than you.
Well, not necessarily older. So it depends. Automatically, if they're older, they're considered the elder. But some people that are in their 50s can be considered elders because of their wisdom and because the community has honored them with that. I'm a firm believer that people that I call elders are someone that earned that position. They earned that title.
I get that too.
Yeah. So when we made a point of bringing leaders in from the community, and we made a point of bringing elders in to be a part of the mythology. I always say it wrong.
Mythology.
Not mythology, but the mythology.
Methodology?
Yes.
Methodology.
I always have
Okay, we'll get this proper English.
I'm learning English. I'm doing very well, by the way. So we try to incorporate both worlds with the data collection and with the traditional part of it. For example, we had the retreat with the parents, and you went to the retreat, and did you go to the retreat?
No, I don't think so.
The retreat that we had, ideally you wanted the parents involved. When I say parents, I mean both parents.
Yeah.
But we probably had around 30 or 40 people all together with children, and I think we only had 1 or 2 males there.
Mm-hmm.
They're not a part of their families, again, because we have such a high rate of single parents.
It's like it would be really nice if you can have somebody have property, have your NAC meeting, Native American Church.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to have the Native American Church here. I wish we could.
But we can't practice that off the res because it's peyote.
And what is peyote?
Peyote is your mother. Peyote is very sacred.
It's a sacrament.
It's a sacrament.
Wow.
It's a cactus.
It's cactus button, and it's only grown one place in Texas, and they fenced it in 10 years ago and are now charging us for it.
As with so many things, it remains to be seen whether or not we're going to be able to practice indigenous religion based on how our colonizers practice our religion. So so ayahuasca is the largest spiritual herb that is used by indigenous people, meaning there are, easily 1 million ayahuasca users. People were turning a blind eye to the use of ayahuasca at the international level until a group of Europeans formed an ayahuasca church, and it worked its way through the legal system in Europe, but ayahuasca in many countries is considered to be a legitimate spiritual herb.
Okay, I'm not familiar with it at all.
So there has been talk in the last few years about ayahuasca and its use similarly in the United States, because so many people in the world use ayahuasca as opposed to peyote. Likely we are going to be, those of us who are peyote users will be affected by what's going to come in the next few years with ayahuasca in this country.
I've heard something about ayahuasca, but I don't know in depth. As far as me telling you that I have been to Native American church, I believe everything. It saved my life in a way. Because when I went there, I was drug addicted, Everything. Anything you can imagine, I did. Until I went there and I believed that something greater than myself. And it was having been something that I never tried. Something greater than myself saved me. And I believe it's my Father.
So traditional healing, this is a part of traditional healing, whether it's sweat lodges that you don't pay for, ever pay for. Whether it's the Native American Church, I'm a member of the Native American Church, and peyote is a sacrament. And in the middle of that sacrament, there's a little fuzzy thing, little white fuzzy. That's strychnine. So when you drink beer and you get a buzz, it's because your little brain cells are dying. So that's what strychnine does to you. That's why you get a buzz. So my experience with peyote is not a high.
No.
It was not a high. It's never a high.
It's never.
There's a ceremony.
You never. I found out you never get high before you go in there smoking drugs. You never do that. It will talk to you. It will tell you everything you did wrong, which is you disrespected it. You go in there with a pure body. You go in there after you come out of sweat lodge. You go in there, you sweat 4 rounds. You go in there, you sweat. Then you go into the meeting, and you once you step through that door, you're like in a church.
Yes.
Totally beautiful. Totally. You know, the medicine man, he's sitting there. He's got his the drum, the road man, water drum, and to hear that boom,
firekeeper.
Yeah, firekeeper. They're all very spiritual.
So it's all a part of our healing. By the way, it's a 12-hour ceremony.
Yeah.
You kneel for 12 hours. Okay, and what was
go to sleep.
It was interesting. There was a lot of older people there that were participants that generally go to it every week. On the res, they have access to it anytime, and never fell asleep. They just you have the water drum. It's a totally unique sound. We actually read passages from the Bible, so when it parallels Christianity. I think that's a surprise to some people because it was a surprise to me. You knew about that, right? Yeah, but it. We have a creator, whether they call him Jesus or God or all the different other titles that they have. We all believe in, the Great Spirit and the Great Mystery. It just goes by different names. So we share our religion. We can't share. We cannot share the peyote ceremonies because you have to be tribally enrolled to go into it. But we share other parts of our religion, or spirituality. We don't use the term religion. I don't use the term religion. Spirituality.
Play some peyote music.
That's the water drum.
It goes on for 4 rounds. No, this is the second round. We're gonna play it again. That rattle means very much. The rattle, the water drum. Means very much. When I listen to it, sometimes I just sit at home and I listen to this. And I try to remember the things I did when I was on the res and how it reflects me today.
So it's literally a drum. It's not a big drum. It's a small drum with water in it. So that's how you get that sound.
Shells. It's got a shell in it too.
That's how you get that sound.
These are sacred songs to us.
So I guess there should be something said about making a distinction between what is traditional and what is pan-Indian. Those words mean something, but they have nothing to do with how sacred something is. Right? So peyote and the American Indian Church is a pan-Indian spiritual movement, and you don't have to be from a certain people or a certain nation. You just have to identify and presumably practice,
Yeah.
right?
Wait. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
your indigenous ways, right? We were speaking earlier about another pan-Indian ceremony, the powwow, right? The powwow is a sacred ceremony to the Shinnecock people in New England. And like so many things, have been given to the bulk of us as indigenous people to use to connect with our spirituality. Another one of those pan-Indian things would be dream catchers, right?
Go over before you go to sleep.
Dream catchers are Ojibwe.
That was, yeah, Ojibwe. Ojibwe, yeah.
The word Chippewa and the word Ojibwe is the same exact word. Right. The word is Ojibwa, right?
We just call them chips.
The French called them Ojibwa, which became Ojibwe to some people, and the English called them Chippewa. Right. It's one of the things that we try to impart to people. A lot of people who are Chippewa or Ojibwe don't know this history. Right. But so the dream catcher is another one of these pan-Indian sacred things.
Does anybody know what a dream catcher is? Have you seen them?
You could not have failed to have seen them.
They're everywhere.
In this culture. And we can look at them and tell you whether or not we think that thing has been made by an indigenous person or not.
Yep.
Right? The ribbon shirt. Ribbon shirt. Another that was given to people by the Lakotas. And so a lot of these are, these are contemporary spiritual items that many people who identify as a Native person will have or have access to, or at least have heard of, right? If not their own traditions. Where we are suffering as indigenous people is in the practice of our own traditions, because our own traditions call many times for people who share those traditions. So some of these ceremonies we don't share with other people, right? And so if you don't have your people, if you are not around your people, or your people are not around you, you fail to partake in this ceremony. My son is at the middle school, and they are teaching in his choir class. Have we talked about this? Have we talked about this here? They are singing the Blessing Way. Now, the Blessing Way is a sacred song, and it is not supposed to be like many sacred things. We are not Christians, right? We are not Jews. We are not Muslims. We do not have a book that we are forcing you to read, and if you do not read, then other things will happen to you. We don't proselytize, right? That is abhorrent to us. You ask us what we think, we will tell you. But it is not for me to say to you, you are living your life incorrectly because you don't follow my tenets. Right? So the things that we do in the way that we practice our spirituality comes not only from the doing and the saying, but from the follow-through and from the preparation. So these people here who are at the middle school who are singing this song, they can take something that is sacred and pull it out of context and present it to you as something which it is not. Out of context, it is something that is dangerous, right? Which is why it becomes very important when you are looking at indigenous spirituality, when you are trying to engage with indigenous spirituality, that you do things properly. Bob said you don't pay for a sweat. You don't pay for a sweat. Not in money. Not in money, but you do pay for a sweat. It is your responsibility to bring some tobacco. It is your responsibility to watch the words that come out of your mouth. You do not lie. You do not tell untruths in a sweat lodge. Right? You do pay. My grandmother taught me many things. And the cost to all those things, very, very simple, that I have been paying my whole life. Do not think bad thoughts and do not say bad things. Simple, right? So, I'm saying these things because I want to illustrate that I said earlier, our peoples are not the same. We practice many of the same spirituality that are contemporary, and also throughout our historical tradition, we have practiced similar spirituality. The sweat lodge is universal, North and South America. How people engaged in those sweats varied, right? My people, we have the black drink. And the black drink dancers, Asiyahola, were considered to be sacred and holy people. In fact, Asiyahola, the black drink dancer, is the name of our chief of the Seminoles, who was very instrumental in fighting the United States.
You call him
Osceola?
Osceola, yeah, that's how I'm used to. Yeah.
Asiyahola is his name. Black drink dancer.
Okay.
Our religious people and our political leaders were often the same. Those people who were our elders, who were wise enough to incorporate not only, what we want politically from our engagements with other people or our engagements with the world, who also understood that it's not what we want as the defining factor of how we engage with the world around us, but what is best for the generations to come. And so, here when we're talking about elders and how we had a lot of elders in the community, we still have elders in the community.
Not as many.
Not as many.
Not as many.
But since the 70s, we had a real blossoming, a real awakening of the blood in us. The blood that I have comes from my mother, right? Back to the beginning of time, that blood speaks. Back in the 70s, people, you would hear them say, the blood started speaking to them, right? And today, my son is here, but we have a lot of people in town, his age, to my age, who are quote unquote indigenous or native, or whose family recognizes themselves as native, or whose elders recognize themselves as native, but many of us now are just trying to fit in. My grandmother told me quite plainly, to be an indigenous person is not easy.
No.
And it's not supposed to be. So, in the disposable culture that we live in, where everything, has to be easy and drive through, you can see the challenges that we're faced with, right? Assimilation is quite easy to do in this country, and we have been resistant to it, and many of us still are resistant to it, but little by little, year by year, these things, go away from us. How many native languages are still being spoken? How many ceremonies are still being held? Right? How many songs are we still singing when we are doing our day-to-day chores?
That's the only thing that you said, it really makes a lot of sense. Me being here in the city, I cannot practice my beliefs. Me being off the res, I cannot practice what I believe in. I got this government here, but it's not who I want to be. I want to be back on the res. But I know if I go back there to the res, there's no jobs, there's no place of employment. It takes 4 hours just to cross Navajo land.
Right.
4 hours.
Right.
How much time do we have left? So I'm getting an idea.
45 minutes.
Great. Okay.
I have been to Denata many times.
Yeah.
And I have to say, that area, depressed,
Yep.
but
It's the wealthiest nation.
yes, and you have a lot of spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of spirituality,
Mhm.
a lot of
You
spirituality.
go to you go to North Dakota, South Dakota, look at that res. It's like a third world country. You go to Navajo res, well, you think people got money. But what you still got? You still got a third world country. On the richest land there is.
We should be the richest group in this country, Native Americans, because the percentage of natural resources alone are the highest
But I mean,
in any area.
that's one way of looking at it. But if those things didn't happen just by happenstance,
No.
Right?
our ancestors made choices.
Well, the government made the choices for most of the land, and usually it was useless, barren land.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, the government used force.
Yes.
We made choices, and that's why they had to use force, because we continually chose to resist.
And continue to do so.
And continue to do so. It's almost 100 years, coming up.
It's been longer than that.
Almost 100 years where we have been citizens.
Yeah,
So-
1924.
Has
Any
not been
questions?
100 years yet.
Any questions so far?
We wasn't allowed off of res until what, 60s? You could be on there, but you weren't allowed off the res until it was in the 60s.
I don't know.
In some areas, we weren't allowed to vote until 1978, and yes, you're right. In some areas, you weren't allowed off the res.
That's you gonna stay here. Somebody when they asked my mother, you want to try a new place, want to go relocation? She jumped on the first plane, first railroad track come out of there. She came here to Cleveland. So me to tell you that I've seen the res when I was younger. My parents they would take us there every other year. As I got older, I moved there, and that's what I really learned on what it's like to be in. But I was in my 30s. I was still, crazy, stupid.
You had a question?
Yeah, I guess like somewhat similar vein, but like I've been reading as a biology major. I've been reading about like traditional ecological knowledge or like indigenous knowledge. It's like I feel like it's like the Western sciences. Like I'm curious what language you would use to talk about the wisdom that various Native American or American Indian groups have about the land and how that's being distributed and used and almost like exploited because you're not getting any like either monetary compensation for the knowledge you hold and kind of is just being like sold off again by
There's going to be a wide spectrum of thought on that.
And Bob, I'll start, and you can bring it back to maybe more mainstream, because I just laugh at the whole thing. We said that the stars were our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that entails. Science has spent billions and billions and billions of dollars to confirm that the light we see, not there, used to be there. Ancestors. We say that, all things are related. And all things have a spirit, and all things are connected. And scientists spend billions of dollars later to come to some quantum understanding that all points in space and time are connected. Right? So we say things, and the conversation would go much faster if they could just be accepted as truth. Mm-hmm. Right? We didn't get this far by being ignorant. When it's springtime now, and you will see all these baby squirrels now in the next 5 or 6 weeks, all just smashed all over the roads. You'll see them. Why? Because they're dumb. Right? Just like your parents were afraid of you when you were teenagers, going out drinking and driving, and whether or not you're going to come back in one piece. Why? Because you're dumb. With no experience, there is no knowledge. All the dumb animals get killed off, and the ones that survive are the ones that have learned. Mm-hmm. We could not have made it to this point by being ignorant. But in the mythology of Western society, your ancestors were cavemen. Ooh, ugh, ugh, ooh, ugh, ugh. And so you are ashamed of them. They didn't know how to use computers. They certainly didn't know how to use my Gmail. Right? They were ignorant people. But that's not reality. Right? That's a construct. And so the conversation would go much faster if we could get rid of the construct, if we could just, continue on. Because the people who are really at a disadvantage are you. The knowledge that we have, the knowledge that I have that was passed on to me by my grandmother was passed on since the beginning of time. I pass it on to my child. Who's the person who's not benefiting from that knowledge? You. So, we're some patient people. We've been talking, and we continue to talk. And when you ask us, we will continue to say. But we know that Western society considers us to be stupid. You look at any indigenous group, ask any indigenous group around the world what their oppressors think about them. They think we're stupid. We don't know anything. And sooner or later, you come back to us. We're smart enough to wait. And when it is something that we cannot wait on, we are smart enough to rise up without all this baggage, of how you have to be this way and you have to be this way. Because the truth of the matter is, we have a relationship with the earth, right? Just as I am not going to let you hurt my mother, how can I let you hurt my mother, the earth? Right? So I think many of us have traditions that have prophesied, right, that at some point this culture, which has happened before, this culture will begin to become indigenized. And when that happens, the Hopis say that white brother is going to come, right? And when white brother comes, you better be living like you're a native. Mm-hmm. right? Otherwise, that is the end. That's the Hopi tradition. But other people have other prophecies that call for our oppressors being touched by the earth. Can't be here without being touched by the earth. So, and we wait.
I'm gonna get something to drink before I start, okay, if you don't mind.
Did that answer your question?
Come on, give me
I
the
guess,
question.
so can we take a 5-minute break then, I guess?
Where do you get drink at? Is it written? It's written. It's read, and it's spoken. You know. And when I see the language, I'm like, I cannot. It's hard for me to even pronounce half the words because I'm here in white man's land. So,
Yeah. So we do our orally, so that's so important for us to be, whether it's Indians or non-Indians, it doesn't matter. You know, it's important to pass it on and to educate people, and we're losing way too much of it. And I'm hoping to be around as long as I can to continue doing what we've been doing and what we're doing now. So.
Do you value? Oh yeah. Like, would you want your history to be written down, or is that?
I would want the traditional way. I would like it to be passed on the traditional way. And I learn things all the time. I from other Apaches, Chiricahuas, when I was in Oklahoma, you know, people that I've met that are very traditional, and you pass it on that way. But the Apaches, the White Mountain Apaches, have written history. Lenore Ethelwald gave me the book, and somebody stole it, that the chief wrote about the White Mountain. So it just depends on the different groups that you have. I think it's important, now, more so now, that if we were not able to continue it orally, to put it in writing, or modern technology, film it.
Speaking of modern technology, we might run out of either space or battery.
Already ran out of space.
Already ran out of space.
Are you all right? Okay.
And we're in
We're
front
still
of
doing an
it.
audio recording now,
Okay.
but
Okay.
it may only last like 10 minutes.
I got a tape
15
recorder, so
Okay.
Do you?
less high tech, but
nah.
Get it going. Get it going.
it is.
But you can start whenever.
Okay.
You're going, yeah.
So when we were talking about the Native American church, I was married at the my ceremonies were at the Native American church, and the reason for that that was our way with my wife of being married. That was the real way for us. However, she insisted on the clerk of courts and a Catholic wedding. She just wanted to make sure, I guess, that I wasn't going anywhere. But so out of the 3 ceremonies, that is the most important to me. That was my marriage. That was a marriage, and it was great because after every services that we have at the church,
feast.
we have a feast. It's like
So much
a
food.
feast of all feasts. This is like tables of food, and the whole. It's interesting because the whole community comes out for the church. They come out and they participate. The teepee's huge, and they come out and they if they're not in there as a part of the ceremonies, they come out for the eating, and so it's just like a whole gathering. There's like a couple hundred people there, and it's just so cool. It was really cool.
Very beautiful.
Really nice. Yeah, you don't go to sleep after that.
You don't
and
drink
you
no
don't
water.
want to. What'd you say?
You don't drink water.
No drink. You don't. Nothing. You just.
The water is very sacred. The water is what you drink before you come out of there. So in there you're gonna drink tea, which is peyote tea.
Yeah.
You know.
And you take a cup with you.
The cup.
Does anybody know what the cup's for?
The cup, sacred water.
No.
Well, if it's anything like the black drink, I
To
will
throw
have
up
to say
in.
it's for vomiting in.
They told me if I throw up, I throw on the side.
No, they gave me tin cans. We used tin cans. I only had to use it once. You throw up in it.
Well,
So peyote will cause your body to react.
you will react to it.
Some
Very
people
sick.
won't. Even the older people that were there still had their can there, like an old Campbell can without the thing on there. And then there's two ways of ingesting peyote. You could do it liquidly with tea, and generally the young children do that. Or you can take there's a
powder.
ceremony before that, and you grind it up. You take that. So we have an hour that we spent doing that, and we grind it up, and then you ingest it with just teaspoon, and you just chew on it.
I had the little buttons. And eat the buttons.
Oh, you had the whole buttons? Well, I didn't have the whole buttons.
I ate
never
the
did
whole
that.
buttons,
We always
yeah.
grinded it up. So everybody does it differently, but and it's not. And I'll be real honest. Man,
You don't
I'm
use
shutting
it
up
drugs.
the camera.
You don't take it and think that you're gonna get high.
Okay, you just said it. In my
Don't
younger
do that.
days, I smoked pot. Okay,
Don't do
so you're thinking, well, wait, is this? I don't want, am I getting high? Is this going to get me high? And they're saying, no, you're not going to get high. But
Don't talk to
you
you.
have a drug that is labeled hallucinogenic. It's illegal. It's illegal
By government
by
standard.
government standards to have these ceremonies.
They can raid your.
Not on the
peyote.
res. Yeah, they can rate it.
They can raid it
Yeah.
if they think that you're getting high in there.
Yeah, nobody gets high. It's
No.
never about. It's a sacrament. And when I've ran into, like Eli told me when he was younger, they used to party on it.
No, you
And I
can't
used
do
to
it.
say, that's a sacrament. You don't party on that. They leave the strychnine in it, the little white fuzzy stuff in there. So we don't. We use it as ceremonial. We use it as a religious or a spiritual ceremony. And it's just an unbelievable experience. No matter how many times you do it, it's just unbelievable. And like the sweat lodge, it's a healing. It's a physically heals you and mentally heals you. It's really, really good. And our programs that we used, with like the Red Road for alcoholism, alcohol program that we had, was again centered on sweat lodges and traditional way. And we had the highest success rate of any other groups out there doing that. The problem was we had a private funder, and I think we only got we didn't really have a lot of money, and they weren't able to refund it, but it was so successful. Ideally, we needed to move further on to get other funding for it. But people are skeptical if they don't know about it. You hear AA, you hear that works, and whether it does or doesn't. I mean, I've attended the meetings with people that were later came to our programs just to see what the programs are about. But I mean, they work for people. I mean, they work. If they work, they work.
If they
It's
allow
good.
you, if you allow that in you, it will help you.
I-
Me couldn't help me.
So I have a different approach. I used to when I was a kid, I volunteered for an alcohol program. And the problem I had is not the problem, but a lot of the people that were there, mostly men, would say, well, how could you understand this if you don't have a drinking problem? How can you relate to us? Well, you have a problem. You have a disease. You have a problem. I can understand some of it, So, but anyway, did I answer your question? Or can we continue on with it?
What the question was.
Talk about something around here.
Do you want to just move on then? Any other questions?
So
If you notice that everything keeps jumping back to ceremony, tradition, whether it's medicine, whether it's peyote, whether it's praying, the traditional ceremonies, singing,
and smudge.
ceremonies, smudging. Smudging is another proven to clear the air of bacteria, smudging.
Spirits.
But for us, it's always been for us, it's the heart of spirits, good spirits and bad spirits. And, I smudge, I've smudged homes for people that have bad spirits, you might call them ghosts, or bad spirits. Children having bad dreams. When you smudge around the house, you smudge everything. You start from the bottom to the top. Smudging is a cleansing, and it's a spiritual cleansing for us, and it absolutely works. And it doesn't matter if you're native or not native. It's just we use sage, we use sweetgrass,
Cedar.
Pardon me?
Cedar, maybe.
Cedar, yes, absolutely. When they sing at the drum, you're gonna find cedar, you're gonna find sage, you're gonna find sweetgrass, and you're gonna find tobacco. It's all put on top of the drum before they start singing for our prayers to the Creator. It's really cool. I love our ceremonies. They're really neat. Yes.
I was wondering if you all could talk about your perspective on non-Indigenous people either participating in the ceremonies, wanting to learn more about the ceremonies, or just the idea of people who want to participate who don't have the ancestral background of it.
I am all for it. And Black Elk wrote a book about that. And we want to include everybody except some of the ceremonies like the kivas and some of the other ceremonies that are not meant for anyone else. I want to include everybody because, one, you're learning something. We're talking about ceremonies, and I'm sure you've learned something today here that you never knew about. Okay, so you're learning who we are. The only problem I have with non-Indians is when they exploit it and you become New Agers and they sell it. They sell it. That infuriates me. They sell our ceremonies, our tradition. That's the only upsetting. But otherwise, to share it, I think it's great. I think that that spirituality is a very important part of life. So yeah, I'm all for it.
Could you speak a little bit to kind of along the lines of what you were talking about earlier, Sundance, in terms of like just these intricacies of what the terminologies are, but also like if non-Indians do want to go about participating in these ceremonies or learning about these ceremonies, just like how to be respectful in doing that.
Okay, well, let me jump in.
Okay.
Because, you know, I think that there are some ceremonies, like Bob said, that are completely fine for everybody to learn. When you go to a powwow, right, at some point, there's going to be the call for all nations. At that point, feel free to get up and dance.
Oh, intertribal. Yeah, intertribals, yeah.
With the native people. It is for all nations, right? But then there are some that are particularly sacred, and those should be respected. And not only should they be respected by you not participating in them, they should also be respected by you encouraging the people who should be participating in them to participate in them. Right? There are some ceremonies, just like many things that indigenous people do, that cannot be taken out of context. I had a friend a long time ago, and she was a Buddhist, and she lived in Boulder, and she was going to school for, Buddhism. And I tried to have a conversation with her about her Buddhism, and as she put it to me, well, this is Buddhism for Americans, because Buddhism in Asia does not work for us here. And I kind of reacted to that, and it took me a long time before I realized why I reacted the way that I reacted to that. And it is the idea that you can get the same thing out of it with your shortcut. Right? My grandmother told me specifically, it's not supposed to be easy. The things that you are doing are designed to be hard. They are supposed to be hard, and you are supposed to respect how hard they are by doing your best. And not just doing your best, doing it the way it's supposed to be done. Because if your best is not doing the way it's supposed to be done, then your best is not good enough. Do it better. Right? That is foreign to this culture. So I feel that if you are going to be respectful, and this is not how you are in the ceremony. I'm not talking about how you are in the ceremony. You are respectful when you walk into the room and you participate in the ceremony, and then you leave and you go back to business as usual. You know, this is the evil empire that we live in. And I would suggest to you that it might be somehow unfair to us as indigenous people, and even to yourself, trying to learn about indigenous people, to take that shortcut. So if you are going to try to learn, do it properly. And if you don't know what the proper steps are, ask. Because once you ask, I told you we don't proselytize, but once you ask, someone will certainly tell you. And at that point, as we all are members of different nations, at that point, you might have 3 or 4 different people telling you 3 or 4 different things. Sorry, don't know what to tell you at that point. Talk amongst yourselves. I don't know. But in any case, things have to be done in a certain fashion. And if you can do those things in that fashion, then perhaps it might be appropriate for you to participate in certain ceremonies. But if you cannot do them in the fashion that they are supposed to be done in, then it is certainly inappropriate. Case in point, choir and the blessing way. No difference. We would be happy for her to conduct a blessing way for indigenous people here. But that's not what she's doing. And by not doing it in the appropriate fashion, everybody is done a disservice.
That's like open up the internal borders, just have indigenous tribes out here in Ohio have a reservation here. That would be really nice. But who's going to do it?
I'll do it. I'll do it.
How do we go about this, have a reservation here in Ohio?
In Ohio.
Pennsylvania.
Well, Pennsylvania has
West
reservations.
Virginia.
Pennsylvania has reservations. And they certainly have indigenous people who represent the nations. So when we were trying to reinter those ancestors that I had in my possession, I was talking with the Seneca Nation Museum, and they were in Pennsylvania. But, here, for us to come together, we really need a land base. And that might be something, obviously, that we have to engage in private ownership, or at least to purchase it, how we have that land in trust or hold that land in trust after that is something that can be worked out. But, it does pose a problem for us as Native people to live amongst our oppressors without a land base, because they have shown repeatedly that they like to invalidate us. And one of their major ways of invalidating us currently is by choosing to overlook us and going to where? A reservation. Run the reservations out and then ask them what they think.
When you live on a reservation, you don't own land. You don't own land. You might guard it, you might protect it. It's like, I can understand how they say, well, this was given to you to keep, to protect. You got forests, you got mountains, you got hills. When I went to Navajo land, I'll tell you, it's the most beautiful land I ever seen. Then I went down to Apache. Then I went over to Pueblo, Hopi, I've seen how these people live. It's so, for us not to own land out here, to be sacred and, follow the old rules, we cannot own the land. It should be given to us. For us to teach our kids, our people.
I don't think there's any harm, though, in us purchasing it.
Yeah.
You
You
have
know,
to purchase
the-
it now.
I
You
mean,
can't
they-
go into trust now.
we can't get it any other way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the only way you can
We
do
have
it.
we have a tension here between indigenous people, like all over the world, between indigenous people and parkland.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what should be given back to indigenous people by law becomes parkland.
I called Bundy to see if he'd help us. It's a joke, sorry. Do you know who Bundy is?
Ted Bundy?
He's a militia. It's a militia that took over one of the parks, claiming that they have a right to that land. Do you remember that? And
Last year.
it became a firefight. And they finally sent the feds in, I guess, and they went to court and they won. It just amazed me. But there were other charges, and some of the followers of Bundy's group have been incarcerated and are now serving time for taking over the land. But their attitude is that this is federal land, even though it was Indian land. It was federal land. Public parks should be owned by everybody, and that was their position. And actually, public parks are owned by us. Those are ours. They took that from us. Eminent domain, if you want to call it. They took that from us. But the 1868 treaty, which is what Alcatraz was centered on and a lot of other places, states if the land is no longer used, then it goes back to Native Americans, which again identifies the rightful owners. We are the rightful owners.
But do they enforce
99% of our land was given for 361 useless treaties. That was the exchange.
it? Look at
Maybe
Alcatraz.
98, 99. Pardon me?
Look at Alcatraz.
Yeah, same,
Federal
that's it,
prison.
right.
It should be given back to the natives.
Yeah, well, that's why we took it over. Because we're trying to get our point across. Hey, it's
Yeah.
ours, give it back. Now they made a public park out of it.
Eminent domain.
So
But
I
again-
usually start a class out by saying, how many, out of the 361 treaties, how many do you think were honored?
2.
None.
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 Two.
Zero.
I would
None.
get,
None.
I would get a benefit of the doubt,
That's pretty pathetic.
Yours or mine, Your treaty or my
You're a
treaty.
very generous man.
I always start off with a knowledgeable, educated, populous audience by asking people what was Columbus's job.
To enslave the people.
How was he employed? What was his employment? What did he do for a living?
He's a slave trader.
You're not the person.
Slave trader, yeah. Do you believe in Columbus Day?
Do I believe in Columbus Day?
Yeah.
I believe it exists.
I don't believe in it. I'm
yeah.
sorry. I don't believe in it.
So I did announce this before some people showed up. May 5th, we are at City Hall. We are talking to them about getting Columbus Day changed to Indigenous Peoples Day. Come on out and support us.
Is that just like for
It's at City Council.
Ohio?
It's for,
Or for Oberlin?
Oberlin.
Specifically.
Right. And if we have some steam and impetus, we might be able to roll it out, maybe even countywide. But I have to say this, last Columbus Day, we had a demonstration there on corner of Tappan Square down by all the banks and stuff. And the papers came out and they took some pictures. And we had one of the 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader, I forget, one of the middle schoolers who mother had pulled him out of school, and he was there holding a sign saying Columbus raped children. And that was in the paper, and it was pretty interesting, the comments.
Truth hurts.
After that, right, the truth does hurt. So that's what we're going to be doing, and hopefully, at least in one place around here, we will have a safe haven for ourselves as we try to work on other things. Most notably, and I'm not quite sure how to go about this, and I'm sure that you will all have better opinions of this than I, but how to talk to someone, approach someone in the anthropology department regarding those remains that they have
I
here.
was actually talking with someone in the anthropology department about that the other
first tell me what the content of your conversation, if you don't mind?
Oh, well, I was talking with my